Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm the Book Guy. Today we're going to return to the world of the Hunger Games and look at the most recent prequel/sequel, Sunrise on the Reaping. Now, I'll be honest, when I saw this book was coming out, I thought this is going to be a very pointless prequel, isn't it? We kind of already know where the story is going to end up. We've already seen Haymitch's background, backstory, all that, and I read it out of a certain obligation to complete the series. Then I realized it was amazing. Sunrise on the Reaping came out just short of 6 months ago, and yet it is currently the highest rated of all 5 Hunger Games books on Goodreads, by a considerable margin too. And to be totally honest, in the past I have kind of criticized the previous prequel, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, for not really doing much to add to the wider story. But that's not the case here. I think that Sunrise on the Reaping does a lot to contribute to the wider Hunger Games story and tell an original story all on its own. In many ways, it is the perfect prequel. It also re-explores the big themes of the Hunger Games, but some 15 years later, looking at themes of propaganda and the control of information, about controlling people under authoritarian regimes, and about the uphill battle that is resistance. So we're going to talk about this book today, spoiler-free of course. I'll help you decide if you want to read it, and ultimately I'll try to tell you why this is such an important book for today. It's the 50th annual Hunger Games, and everyone in all the districts is terrified because it is a quarter quell, and for a special event, there will be twice as many tributes. In District 12, Haymitch Abernathy has a mother and a brother that he must provide for, and a girlfriend who he is deeply in love with. He has everything to lose, but when his name is called out, he wants to fight. Not just to fight to survive to get back to the ones he loves, but he wants to rebel. Because when everything is taken away from you, you have nothing left to lose. Alright, let's address the elephant in the room. First of all, don't we know this story already? We've seen this before. In Catching Fire, Katniss and Peeta look at what happened to Haymitch. We see in just 2 pages his entire story summed up. And this was my thought going into this book, thinking we've already seen the story, so there's not much more to tell, right? Well, I'm going to avoid spoilers here, but let me say very clearly that from page 1 of this book, we realize the story is different. And we know that what Katniss and Peeta saw was edited footage.
Reality can be whatever I want.
This is a really brilliant and effective way to tell a new story. For first of all, it means that anything can happen in the story. Often in prequels, we get that feeling of inevitability because we have to match continuity. It can't go too many different places. But knowing that footage can be doctored and edited and the story can be changed means that once again, anything is possible and tension is introduced into the story. And second, the fact that the story is different means that we are clearly shown the power of propaganda, so it's a thematic reason to change the story as well. Now, writing a prequel is its own art form. It's very much like writing a sequel, where it has to be the same, but different. But a prequel has extra problems that a sequel doesn't have, because it also introduces the fact that there's a certain predictability to the story, and it has to match continuity, so it has to fit with the future story. So I believe that Sunrise on the Reaping strikes that perfect balance of being familiar and different. So some of the familiar things we have in the story are the games themselves. We all know how the Hunger Games work at this point. We have the capital and the districts and the conflict between them. And we also have a couple of familiar faces and a few returning characters and even a few cameo characters as well. But one of the major differences in this story is the fact that we are an underdog more than ever.
Everyone likes an underdog.
I don't.
You see, the main characters and the districts have always been the underdog. They're at the bottom, they're at the lower end of the food chain, and that was always the case, but it's worse than ever now. There's an almost inevitability to any form of resistance. Like, we know it can't possibly work, because we know the Hunger Games continue for another 25 years after this point. The story is also much more tragic. There is that doomed feeling of resistance. It's not like Katniss' story, which is a very Hollywood story about resistance and defiance and rising up and then overthrowing a corrupt government. This is a story which is trying to do a lot of those things, but failing. And in that sense, it's just as important. There's a wonderful quote in the book that says, "You are capable of imagining a different future, and maybe it won't be realized today, maybe not in our lifetime, maybe it will take generations. We're all part of a continuum. Does that make it pointless?" In many ways, this story is like Andor to the original Star Wars trilogy, where the original trilogy was all the big, fun, happy parts of overthrowing corruption, and/or is the gritty, realistic failure of regular people trying and failing to overthrow corruption. But another final important difference in this book is that there is more focus on the propaganda than ever before. This theme is much louder than it's ever been. But we'll come back to that. A major standout in this story is the character work, because Suzanne Collins only has 382 pages of this book, and yet we get a lot of characters who we get to know distinctly very quickly. And I think that's a real gift that she has as a writer, to give us lots of characters that we get to know in a very short amount of time, but still makes them unique and still makes us care about them, often against our will. I'll be totally honest, I went into this book thinking, this is probably going to be a tragic story. I'm going to just harden my heart and not get attached to anyone. Next thing I know, I'm getting attached to everyone. And I'm like, what? I didn't consent to this. I'm feeling... I've read many other books where we spend hundreds of pages with characters and I still don't care about them. And then I will have one conversation with a character in this book and suddenly feel like I know them intimately and I would do anything for them, which is all the more cruel when, it's the Hunger Games. But this is an important part of the story too, that conflict always has real people as the victims. A lesser author might have written a concept like the Hunger Games and had people dying and children dying, and it would have just been, a blunt way to describe that it's a tragedy. But instead, we get personable characters, we get real people who are the victims of this conflict. And I think that's the real beauty of it, that Suzanne Collins doesn't want us to feel as though these are just numbers on a chart, or these are just people in a distant land who have no connection with us. She wants us to know that these are real people, and her ability to make us care about these people is one of the greatest strengths of this book. Another aspect of the character work is that there are a lot of familiar characters in this story, and in many ways there are a lot of cameos. Now, I've seen some people criticize it for being unrealistic, but I thought it flowed really nicely. There is a lot of tie-ins to the previous prequel and to the later, the original trilogy, and I think it works quite seamlessly because, let's face it, these people don't exist in a vacuum. All of these people are there, and they have been there the whole time. Regarding the plot, there is always that certain predictability of a prequel. We know where it's going. So the real challenge of writing a prequel is to introduce genuine tension into the story and still creating that sense of uncertainty. So part of the predictability of this story is the fact that we're in the Hunger Games again, and we know how that structure works. We know it starts with the reaping, and then the chariot tour, and then the talk show, and then the games themselves, and all of that's a little bit familiar. But without spoilers here, where the plot becomes original is knowing that so much of it has been changed due to the propaganda, and also the fact that we as the audience can't help but care about these characters, therefore we want it to be different, even though we kind of know it can't be. And it's that genuine conflict within us, the reader, that makes it such an effective book. We want to defy our own fate and the inevitability of where we're sure the story must end. But like all good Hunger Games story, this book also has some very powerful themes that add so much meaning and depth to the story. So it's not just shooting arrows and stabbing and fighting the corruption, it's about what does this mean for our real world. So the first of our big three themes is propaganda. Now that's always been a part of the Hunger Games, but in many ways, it's louder here than it's ever been before. I mean, I don't want to speculate on what the author intended, because I don't like putting words in people's mouths, but I do get the sense that Suzanne Collins was trying to teach us about propaganda all along, and then she noticed all these people swallowing propaganda, and she's like, y'all are not getting this, so I'm gonna make it louder. This story strongly contrasts the difference between reality and then what we see on camera. We see a lot of what goes on behind the camera and how it's so doctored and changed from what really happened. And it's this constant juxtaposition between the two of us that helps us, the reader, and younger readers understand and question what we're really being presented with. One unique aspect of this story is we see how the propaganda affects individuals and how they can in turn pass on the propaganda of the capital. There's one powerful scene that I genuinely love so much in this book, where we meet a wonderful, kind person who is comforting to Haymitch and kind to him and assuring him, I know how hard this is for you and it's a terrible thing and I'm so sorry you have to go through with it. And then they just come out with, But you know, the Hunger Games are really important and it's best for everyone.
That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
And you realize that this sweet as pie person is casually justifying why children should be murdered. And I think it's a very important realization, the idea that propaganda can affect all people, not just the evil, angry people, but even the kind people. And it's often the really good people who can have such evil ideas and be convinced of them all the same. Our second big theme is authoritarian regimes. The fact that the capital can break whatever law they want, or they can completely fail in the things that they try to do, and they have no accountability. Like, if someone in government makes a mistake, there should be a hearing and a question as to whether or not they are capable of, continuing in their job. But in an authoritarian regime, they can just keep going and do whatever they want, and no one will dare question them. This book constantly shows us how everything can be legal for certain people, and anything can become illegal for others, all depending on what the government wants. The third big theme is, of course, resistance, rebelling against this authoritarian regime. This book depicts a much harsher version of resistance, where it might be ultimately doomed, or maybe it won't work. And the question is, should it be done anyway? Should we resist only if there's a purpose to it, if there's a hope of success, or should we resist all evil in all forms all the time, no matter what? There's also the understanding that resistance can take time, and often it takes generations to evoke genuine, real change. It's like Gandalf's line in The Fellowship of the Ring.
I wish none of this had happened.
So do all who live to see such times, but that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given to us.
We don't always choose the time and place where we're born, and we don't always choose to fight the fights that are handed to us for our generations, but we can still choose what to do with the time given to us. The Hunger Games is one of the most influential young adult series ever written. It caused a whole bunch of spin-offs and copycats to spring up in the years afterwards, and in many ways a lot of its storytelling ideas were mimicked, but without grasping why they worked in the Hunger Games, so a lot of the tropes became frustrating in the years since. But the Hunger Games really is the definitive standard, at least in my opinion, of what good young adult stories should be. People might sometimes perceive a young adult story as being immature, but this story and the Hunger Games on a whole has never talked down to its audience and never treated them like they're immature. In fact, it's always tackled some heavy themes and deeper meanings without being preachy about it as well, proving that young adults are capable of handling this level of content. Not to mention too, young adults have always been on the front lines of every single major conflict in history. It's one of those things, you know how in Hollywood movies, whenever they have a story that's set in a high school, they tend to cast a bunch of people in their 20s and 30s?
How do you do, fellow kids?
Well, they do the same thing in a lot of war films, and it leads to this perception that soldiers on the front lines are always adult men. In reality, most of them are teenagers, and it's often not their choice to be there either. So I think it's time that we accept that young adults should have the power to make choices and to take actions that affect the world that they live in. And accept that stories that are written for young adults have power, intelligence, and meaning that should be appreciated more widely. One final thought is that Sunrise on the Reaping is an incredibly short book at only 382 pages. But I've said it before and you'll hear it again, short books are incredibly difficult to write and take an extreme mastery of the craft in order to handle. This book has a ton of characters and a ton of significant moments, a fast-moving plot, and some genuinely deep themes that are all compacted into a short, easily read story, and I think that shows some expert writing. So that's all from me today about Sunrise on the Reaping. If you are curious about the other Hunger Games books, I have done an extensive video on all previous 4 before then. You can check that one out, guys. If you want to support the work I do, feel free to check out my books, The Immortal Investigations. I have a shop, and I have a Patreon. Otherwise, like and subscribe, and that'll keep me going. I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye.